Today's program focuses on aerial pictures depicting Ukrainian nature and the life of a free Crimea, a family of painters who created hundreds of unique works in the open air all over Europe. This program, Master of Crafts, tells about eternal painting that experienced the terrible events of 2014 in Crimea. Crimean nature stretches from the hot steppes in the north to the rocks and steep cliffs of the southern coast of the Black Sea. For hundreds of years, the unique peninsula attracted artists, writers, and especially painters. Swiss painter Carlo Bossoli in the mid-19th century travelled around Crimea for 2 years and painted over 70 landscapes and lithographic pictures. It's impossible to imagine the works of Feodosian native Ivan Ivazovsky without magnificent seascapes painted under the impression of Black Sea storms. Archip Kuinji, Ivan Shishkin, and Isaac Levitan also depicted Crimean landscapes. Some of them got a second wind under the influence of the magical Crimean nature. Few of these painters could imagine that someone could take away their workshops in Crimea and prohibited to take their own paintings to the mainland. After 2014, this scenario became a reality for painters who spent most of their lives in the currently occupied port city of Sevastopol. The Chebotaru family is an example of how the creative genes of parents leave children no other choice. The surname Chebotaru has four full names of the parents Mykola and Tamara, and sons Andrei and Alexei. They're all linked by love for the changeable moods of nature and work outdoors. We all paint realistic pictures. My sons Alexei and Andrei, wife and I, convey the reality of things. Only the matter of painting is different. One paints with full brush, another with broad pastoso strokes, the third in monochrome colors, and the fourth one paints something average among all of our works. The Chebotaru family paints landscapes, portraits, still lifes. There are hundreds of their paintings. Their exhibitions are regularly held in Kiev, and personal exhibitions have toured China, the United Arab Emirates, and throughout Europe, including the Council of Europe in Strasbourg. This painting is open to the whole world, except the most important region for the family. The members of the Chebotaru family are unwelcome guests in Crimea, annexed by Russia. Their works with eternal themes have become victims of political persecution, just as the painters. The program continues on how Crimea, native for the Chebotaru family, became foreign in a matter of a few weeks. The older generation of painters, Mykola and Tamara, came from a small village in the Odessa Oblast. There, the first experience in painting could only be considered as pampering, but you cannot hide your talent. When a sculptor came to my father's house, he visited our village. He accidentally found my drawings and asked who painted them. My father said that his son had jokingly painted since the army. He looked and considered my pictures better than those painted by fourth-year students at respected art schools. Mykola and Tamara got their art education, and in the late 1970s, when they moved to Sevastopol. In the Soviet times, this city was a closed base of the Black Sea Fleet. For this reason, it was impossible to settle here without special permission. We were lucky that local art studios needed good teachers, and the city sought art designers. In the early 1980s, their son Alexei was born in Sevastopol. He did not plan to become an artist in life. I was still studying music. I played the violin and planned to become a musician. But after leaving the music school, I had no wish to continue studying. After school, I studied at the Sevastopol Institute of Nuclear Energy for several years. But I quickly realized that it was not my calling. He said, I will follow in your footsteps. I will ask him, how can you follow us when you know nothing about painting? I can hardly have confidence in your intention to paint. He says to me, Father, I promise you that it will be the last occupation that I will choose. Alexei Chebotaru got an art education at the same time as his younger brother Andrei. In the early years of the 21st century, they both became famous painters in Crimea and held several exhibitions, including in their native Sevastopol. Local nature inspired Alexei and Andrei to paint new works, and it seemed that fate was predetermined to live and work in Crimea, selling the most successful landscapes to art connoisseurs from all over the world. Only a few weeks in February to March 2014 put an end to the old life. In Sevastopol, the so-called People's Mayor was illegally elected and the Crimean parliament in Simferopol was seized by Russian special forces. It became clear that the Russian authorities decided to cut off Crimea from Ukraine, which was temporarily weakened by the events in 2014. After the so-called referendum, Chebotaru was forced to make a tough decision to move from Crimea to Kiev. But the family of painters experienced this process differently, unlike usual families, because except things necessary in everyday life, it was essential to take their paintings to a safe place. In the case of the Chebotaru family, this was about hundreds of works painted by 4 people over many years. By that time, the Russian military and border guards carefully watched the administrative border between Crimea and Ukraine. They monitored Ukrainian citizens in order that they not take valuable items, including works of art from Crimea. To get Russian permission to export their works, the painters had to take the unprecedented step of acknowledging their own works as insignificant. We were given permits on condition that our works do not have any cultural value, and signed and sealed photos are attached to them. In Crimea, there are still no bodies that issue such permits. We could only apply for a permit in the city of Rostov and to wait for a long time. Having spent a lot of time and money, the painters could take to Kiev most of their works. During one of the trips on the administrative border, Alexei and Mykola Chebotaru gave an interview to a Russian TV channel about the situation in Crimea. Then they still did not understand what their freely expressed views could lead to in the new situation in Crimea. In this interview, I just once expressed my view on Crimea joining Russia. This did not end well for me. After this, my family and father faced some unexpected and quite serious problems at work. The Chebotaru family were members of the Sevastopol Union of Artists, which after the annexation declared itself a Russian organization. Mykola and Tamara Chebotaru lived in the occupied Sevastopol for another year and a half in the hope of finding a way to take all their paintings to Kiev. It was impossible to hold exhibitions because these painters were considered traitors. At some point, it became unsafe for the Chebotaru family to remain in Crimea. We received some calls from FSB officers, after which I told my wife that it's time to leave. We could not take all our works. We had to leave around 500 of our paintings there in our native Crimea. The events in Crimea discouraged Mykola Chebotaru, even after moving to mainland Ukraine. Only recently, his sons dragged him out of his artist block and 4 walls into nature where they were all used to working. And this May, the painters presented both old and new works in an art gallery in Kiev. The Chebotarus admitted that open-air trips always allowed them to unwind and distracted them from the problems in life. Nature does not tolerate fuss, but requires from a painter delicate skills to capture the original landscape from real life. Next on the program, why plein air is considered a unique form of painting and how to distinguish the paintings of the Chebotaru family members. Painting in daylight has been common for an eternity. It was used mainly to create sketches. It was believed that it was impossible to paint a full picture for a limited time in one place and even in a natural habitat. Everything changed in the 19th century when the Anglo-French Barbizon school of painting introduced the term plein air. Plein air connoisseurs considered light and air independent substances and a piece of a pictorial interest. Objects in the picture are not consciously painted, almost not expressed in specific silhouettes, or even disappear. Later, French Impressionists Pierre-Auguste Renoir, Camille Pissarro, Claude Monet and others raised plein air sketches to the level of full pictures. This was needed in order to abandon many academic rules, thus putting a painter's vision first instead of a precise conveyance of a particular landscape. Nature taught me to think, to think, not just to copy nature. A painter who blindly copies right down to a detailed line is just a naturalist. In other words, such a painter figuratively demonstrates the state of nature. Even Chebotaru family members has his or her own creative method. They can paint the same nature scene and come up with fundamentally different paintings from plein air. Tamara Chebotaru prefers still lifes with a characteristic variety of shades. Using flat and convex strokes, she creates a stereoscopic effect that allows the viewer to perceive the image in dimension. Mikola Chebotaru paints more graphical and less color pictures. It is always a bright space with distinguishable strokes and a smooth structure. The brightest among the rest of the works belong to younger Andrei. He works in a bold, impressionistic technique, using small and large spots. Vincent van Gogh painted in a similar manner. He combines active colors in such a way that it appears there is going to be some kind of explosion, but he knows how to touch them, find their relation to each other, and understands that they work very well. The works by Alexei Chebotaru, on the contrary, are more smooth and lyrical. The transitions between colors are always impalpable. He likes to paint air that is sensed on the canvas. He works, like a violin. He uses delicate transitions. He paints in colors, but these color transitions are very lyrical and very romantic. To achieve such an impression of lightness, one needs to paint dozens of pictures, and only in nature. A plein air session usually lasts for 2 weeks, and it's successful if you manage to paint 5 good studies. Then they are finalized in a workshop, but it's important to keep the same mood as it was in nature. You need to practice every day out in nature to feel this lightness in the air and the purity of colors. If you constantly work in the studio, your perception becomes blurred.
Чистоту красок. Если ты постоянно работаешь в мастерской, то восприятие это замыливается.
The Chebotaru family traveled through plein airs in Ukraine, Montenegro, Croatia and Italy, but today they most regret that they cannot return to Crimea.
Крымские художники выкладывают фотографии, что
Crimean painters post the photos of plein air showing the beauties of Crimea. There are so many corners that our brushes have not yet touched, and we'd like to depict them in our paintings.
Не прошли через наши кисти. Хочется их изобразить.
No matter how these painters miss Crimea, they understand that they can live and work only in a free Ukraine. Today, the Chebotaru family continues to paint pictures that inspire art lovers with one simple idea. All shocks in this life are temporary, but both beauty and nature are eternal.